So welcome to Beers with Brownie. We're an international rugby league YouTube series where we bring on international rugby league legends and we tell their stories. So for every 100 subscribers, until we reached 1,000 subscribers, we sent out 10 students to developing international rugby league nations all around the world. We've started putting those videos up on our YouTube channel so you can see how the balls are being utilised and how they're helping develop rugby league around the world. So thank you very much for your support, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. So I'd like to welcome our very special guest for this episode. We've known each other for a number of years, and he's a very passionate international rugby league identity. He's currently the North Queensland Cowboys recruitment manager. He was founder of the West Indies Rugby League, the Vanuatu Rugby League, and in his spare time he also played first grade for the Newcastle Knights. So a big welcome to Dane Campbell. Welcome to the show, Dane.
Thank you very much, Phil. Lovely to be here.
It's good to have you on. So guys, if you're new to the channel, every episode we like to support a beer that supports rugby league. So this episode, as Dane is a member of staff at the North Queensland Cowboys, who are sponsored by 4X. We've had 4X Gold on the show before in the Shane Morris episode, so we're going to try a different 4X product today. We're going with 4X Bitter. So thank you for your support of rugby league, 4X. And also every episode, I like to wear an item of international rugby league merchandise to show my support. And today's episode, we're going with the Philippine Tamaraws. So we sent the Philippines 10 steedings recently, which have now arrived in Manila. So we'll be uploading that video to our YouTube channel shortly. And we were also a player sponsor in the recent Philippines versus Chile game. So they're doing great things over there. So keep up the good work, and all the best to everyone involved with the Philippines Rugby League. Okay, Dane, so my first question, you're very passionate about rugby league. So where did your love of rugby league come from?
Oh, I think I grew up in Queensland, so I was always forefront of every kid that grew up at that time. I guess go back 30 odd years ago, that rugby league was the dominant sport, and it was played at schools and seen on TV. And I guess my father played as well, so there was always an opportunity to be exposed and promoted to the game. And my best friend at primary school played, so joined a local club here in Brisbane actually, and it sort of developed that love and passion for the game from there, which was wonderful. And now here we are 30 years later and I'm still involved.
Excellent. So tell us about when you were growing up. When did you start playing, and which clubs did you play at when you were growing up?
Yeah, sure. So when I first started, it was a small little community club called Pine Rivers Bears. So I played my juniors up until the age of 12. So from 7 to 12, played over at Pine Rivers, and then started to get to a stage where a lot of, I guess, my friendship group through some representative teams were playing at Redcliffe Dolphins. So I ended up over there at 13 years of age, and then came through the junior system at the Dolphins, and was fortunate enough to play in a Colts grand final for Redcliffe against a Norse team stacked with a few decent quality players at the time, and Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith, Billy Slater.
Wow.
They all played in that particular team. Our team, the Redcliffe Dolphins, beat on that particular grand final, which was an amazing experience. And then from there, luckily enough to play a bit of first grade at Redcliffe as a sort of then 18, 19-year-old, which was the formation for my junior career, and then on obviously after that into the seniors.
So Dane, I remember when we first met was probably nearly 20 years ago now, and you were playing for Brisbane East Queensland Cup at the time, I believe.
Yep.
So what made you make the switch from Redcliffe to Brisbane East?
Yeah, so I was at Redcliffe and had played a handful of first grade games. When I was younger, I was with the Broncos as a Broncos scholarship holder at the back end of my schooling, and just thought everything was probably going to work out, that I was going to be a Bronco forever and a day. And like every kid at the time in Brisbane, that was the team that you wanted to play for, and just thought that was going to be the natural evolution. And unfortunately it wasn't to be the case. And so I spent a few years at Redcliffe, coming through a really good system at the time, and some wonderful players playing in first grade, and was looking for a further opportunity. So I went up to North Queensland, gave the guys up there a call, and pestered them enough to get an opportunity with their young guns, and was exposed to that in 2003. It didn't work out for whatever reason, wasn't able to crack into that group. Again, there were some fairly decent young kids there at the time, and
Yep.
They went on to play a bit of first grade. And as a result, I was probably a bit disillusioned as to, being a then 20-year-old, coming through the grades, being of, I guess, fairly decent repute at the time, to then not having a contract with an NRL club, starting to think, was it all in vain? Was it, all that hard work and effort not going to eventuate? And it sort of got to a point where I wasn't going to play at 21 years of age, which sounds silly, but I guess my mentality was that I wanted to be an NRL player, and I didn't feel as though that was going to be achieved. And so I was going to have a year off, actually, and one of my good friends, Lee Coggill, I remember ringing me, and he said that he was going to transition from Redcliffe over to East Tigers, and he said, listen, I've been to train a few times and they're looking for a halfback, and he mentioned my name to the coach at the time, and I said, well, right, I'll come across and just play for fun basically that year, and got there, and as the sliding doors moment happened to work out, that I was given an opportunity to play first grade there at East, and with a really young group and an energetic group, and we then went through and played a Queensland Cup Grand Final that year against Burleigh, which probably in the history of Queensland Cup goes down as one of the better Grand Finals of all time, and extra time, and they eventually beat us, unfortunately, but it was a wonderful occasion. From there, was lucky enough to get picked up by the Newcastle Knights for a couple of years.
So it was a good move for you going to Brisbane East, and so moving on to the Newcastle Knights. So you spent 2 seasons there. So how did that all come about? Was it just scouts saw you playing for East that year, or? Yeah,
correct. There was actually a number of players from our East team that year that got picked up. There was myself, Isaac Kaufman, Charlie Tonga, both ended up down the Bulldogs. Trent Young ended up at the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So, I think, and Lee Coggill, I think, moved back up to North Queensland. So there was a fair few of those boys given an opportunity from having a really good year. And as a result, was fortunate enough to land down in Newcastle at a time where, they had some, again, fair player in my position as halfback, and one Andrew Johns.
The eighth immortal.
Yeah. So that was a good experience to go down there and try and realise my dream of trying to become an NRL player. And, I guess going down there and potentially learning a few things from Andrew, and just how it happened to be, we ended up down there, and that year Andrew got injured at one point in time, and then Stephen Witt, who was probably above me in the pecking order, he got injured at the same time, and by default was lucky enough to get a couple of runs in the NRL, which was what I'd always dreamt of and wanted to achieve, and was able to and fortunate enough to do that.
Yeah, you played 6 NRL games for the Knights, which is a fantastic achievement, and like you say, you fulfilled a lifelong dream. What was it like being the understudy to Andrew Johns? I mean, a lot of pressure there.
Yeah, I guess at the time when you're 22 years of age, you probably don't realise that. You're there and you're playing and you want to compete, and you want to play first grade yourself. So to learn, he was an incredible teacher. He saw the game differently to a lot of others, obviously, and that's what made him who he was. And I guess at the time too, it's an interesting time of Newcastle's evolution. Andrew was probably on the back end of his career, but underneath they had some wonderful young halves coming through, and Jared Mullen and Luke Walsh, and they went on to play a lot of first grade. Scott Duro was another one who went on to have a really wonderful career. So in hindsight, it was wonderful to go there, and but I guess as well it probably coincided with a fairly golden run of good halfbacks coming through their system too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for those in the Northern Hemisphere, Scott Duro, Catland Dragons legend.
Correct, yeah.
So some very handy players you mentioned there. So Dane, for those that don't know, what happened after Newcastle Knights for you?
Yeah, so after I finished up with the Knights, came back to Brisbane, took up a role with the Sunshine Coast Falcons, actually very briefly. They were just starting out, and actually took up the CEO's job of all things, and was only at that time 24 years of age, and probably thinking to myself, well, I've achieved the goal of playing NRL, and I guess in hindsight probably jumped out of that space a little bit quicker than I probably should have. Probably always had a inkling that coaching and or administration might be something I wanted to go into at some point, and as a result that opportunity arose, and I jumped at that, and unfortunately it only lasted probably 3 months, and the itch of playing became too great, and sort of ended up in that role and ended up back down at East Tigers doing the full circle, and spending a few years back at East Tigers before then going to Redcliffe for 1 year, and then transitioning out of being, I guess, more of a goal-orientated football player to be in the coaching stratosphere, and took up a captain coach role with Noosa Pirates up on the Sunshine Coast.
Fantastic. So Dane, your career was unfortunately cut short due to injury, so it must have been heartbreaking not going out on your terms.
Yeah, so Noosa was an interesting one. I obviously went there with the mindset of possibly playing for another 3 or 4 years, and trying to guide a team up there, and obviously learn my own coaching repertoire and find out what works. But yeah, I got punched in a game, and unfortunately, I had bleeding on the brain as a result, and
Jeez.
It pretty scary moment in my life. Ended up in and out of hospital for probably a month duration, and got pretty hairy there. Sort of had stroke-like symptoms at one point, and I remember I just had my young child, my eldest daughter at the time, and she was only probably about 6 to 8 months old, and I remember the doctor basically putting her on my chest at the time and saying, well, this could be potentially the last time you see her, and
wow,
that sort of dawns on you that there's greater things in life, obviously, and when fortunately enough I got through that little period of my life and reassessed there that playing probably wasn't a priority anymore, and so at 26, 27 years of age that was done, and I guess got into coaching probably a little bit earlier than I expected.
So we're now over a decade since that incident. How are you feeling now? How's the body? Like, you're back to full health?
Different people would say different things, I reckon, but I feel pretty good. But there's been no residual effects from that, fortunately. There was no brain damage at the time, and whether into the future there might be some things I'm not too sure of, but right now all good, and I live a fulfilled life and very grateful for that.
Well, that's good to hear. So Dane, after the injury happened, you ended up spending another 2 years at Noosa as the head coach. So tell us, how'd you go?
I don't know if we had utter success. It was challenging, and I'd probably encourage any young coach out there with aspirations to coach at a higher level that it's a really good starting point, that community level rugby league, because you find out a lot about what works and what doesn't, and a lot of the times you're dealing with obviously part-time players, and they're trying to mix in jobs with training, so there's always differing things that you sort of take on board, which is from a coaching to managerial to welfaring type scenario. So you do learn a lot of what could work or what doesn't work, and I think that set me up reasonably well for what was to come in the next few years thereafter.
So Dane, after coaching Vanuatu Rugby League in 2012, so from 13, 14 and 15, you're involved with the Sunshine Coast Falcons setup, so as a coach. So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so the Falcons, originally it was the representative pathway, so under 20s, and then into the A-grade representative side on the Sunshine Coast. And then from there was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to work with a good mate of mine, Danny Gray, look after the Colts at the time, the under 20s, at the Sunshine Coast Falcons, who originally were the Sea Eagles, and then morphed in back to the Falcons, more traditional name. And then, it was a wonderful year to get, I guess, my hands on, coaching a group of really motivated young kids that wanted to aspire to be better. And so that was enjoyable. And then just the way things worked out, that there were a couple of coaching movements during the course of that year, and the following year thereafter, or a mentor of mine and a guy that I'd known for a long time, John Dixon, who coached at Celtic Crusaders, ended up at the Falcons. He asked me to do some stuff with him as an assistant for the back end of that year, and that was an enjoyable experience. And at the time, Melbourne were sending back some players on a weekly basis, so to see that transition again from Queensland Cup level to some NRL fringe guys coming back on a weekly basis, Sully Vunivalu, Nelson Asof Solomon and Ben Hampton, that was pretty cool. And the following year thereafter, another gentleman stood into the role, and Craig Ingebrigtsen asked me to come on board as his assistant coach, which again I was really excited to be a part of, and spent the pre-season involved with the group doing that. And at the end of that pre-season, just the way the world works, the Melbourne Storm transitioned their under-20s team from Melbourne up to the Sunshine Coast in the old NYC, and at the time there was a position made available for a junior recruitment guy, and as a result of, I guess, right time, knowing a few of the right people, was fortunately enough asked by the Melbourne Storm to come on board, and Paul Bunn at the time, who again I'd known for a very long time through my days at the Broncos. You know, he was good enough to give me an opportunity to work under him in the recruitment space, and you know, took that on board in start of 2016. So although my coaching journey ended at that point in time, it was really enjoyable to then go into another phase of my career.
I remember in the past, I really enjoyed talking to yourself and guys like Jason Emery. Jace, if you're watching, shout out to you. You guys you always had an eye for talent. So I thought recruitment would be, you know, that's probably where you'd end up, and that's where you are now. But so tell us, so 2016 to 2020, you're working in recruitment at the Melbourne Storm. That must have been, you know, a fantastic experience for you.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful club, and you know, wonderful people, and probably really blessed that during that period of time, you know, the success that the club had. You know, 2016 they played in the grand final. 2017 they win a grand final. 2018, you know, they're back in against the Roosters. It's like incredible to think that, you know, during the period of time that I was at the club, they had such success, and that's obviously attributed to, you know, wonderful coaching setup, and you know, to Paul Bunn in the recruitment, you know, to bring on those guys at the time. And I guess our challenge, I remember Bunny talking to me very early when I started in the piece, and he said, you know, what we'll be judged upon is how we navigate the future post the big three. And you know, fortunately for the Storm, that seems to be going along really well at the moment for them, and they got some wonderful players. And you know, was really excited to see some of those young guys come into first grade and, you know, get their debuts and now become, you know, household names. It's really been enjoyable.
So Dane, can you tell the viewers some of those players that you've had a hand in recruiting to the Storm?
Yeah, I guess I can say some names. I wouldn't say that they're all, you know, based on me. It's a collaborative approach, and a lot of them, you know, go back to Paul Bunn and his recruitment methods. He was looking after the top end, and obviously my job was to try and identify younger talent, but probably, you know, guys in its current form. Tino Fasua-Maliawi had come from Gympie. You know, he was a guy that come through originally the Broncos setup, but we were fortunate enough to, you know, get him across the board and go down to Melbourne for a period of time. So that was pretty cool to see him transition.
Yep.
Obviously Ryan Pappenhausen was already probably on the radar prior to my time, but it was good to have an involvement with the process of bringing him to the club. You know, and another guy who I'm really, really proud of is Trent Lario, Sunshine Coast Junior.
Yep.
That just, you know, different story again, just worked really hard, and you know, now is becoming the player, you know, a genuine first grader, which is really pleasing to see.
No, fantastic. So, which leads me to 2021, you decide to leave the Storm to head up to the Cowboys. So tell us why the transition and how's it all going?
Yeah, well, it came out of the blue, to be honest. You know, an opportunity presented itself where the recruitment manager had moved on from the Cowboys for another opportunity, and I guess again, rugby league circles the way it is, that you meet people over the course of time, and I was fortunate enough that, you know, I was asked whether it'd be something of interest to me, and you know, without, I guess, knew that at the Storm there was a great opportunity to remain involved and keep doing what I was doing. But you know, also being a proud Queenslander, it was probably a different challenge. Cowboys had success, they probably had a couple of lean years, and then to probably take the big boy shoes too, you know, to go up a step in my career and take on that major role across the senior group. That was something that appealed to me, and you know, I guess ultimately it was one of those sliding door moments that you go from a really wonderful, successful club to a really great challenge with a great club in the Cowboys with a proud history, and you know, a good Queensland club which is close to my heart. And you know, that was exciting, and I'm really enjoying it. Really enjoying, you know, where we're at as a group, and really enjoyed working with you know, Todd Payton, but also Michael Luck, and
Yep.
we all came in at the same time, and we're all going through the process together, and touch wood, but you know, hopefully we continue to have a little bit of success, not just this year, but you know, into the future as well.
So we're filming during Magic Round, and the Cowboys are sitting, is it third on the ladder?
Third at the moment, yeah.
So
hopefully,
going well.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, a nice win tonight against the Tigers, and then
Good luck.
yeah, hopefully.
So when I heard that you came on board with the Cowboys as a recruitment manager, I was really excited because I knew there was going to be some international rugby league signings, and lo and behold, the Cowboys signed two Fijian Sevens gold medalists. So tell us about those two guys.
Yeah, I was really fortunate enough. A really good friend of mine, Wise Katavarata, who I've known for a number of years through the international rugby league space, that He does some wonderful work in Fiji in identifying talent. He's had great success with Viliami Kikau and Suli Vunivalu and Marika Korobiti and these sorts of players. And Wise was fortunate enough to sort of let me know there was a couple of boys in the Fiji Sevens mix that possibly wanted to look at rugby league as an opportunity. And Taniela Sandrugu and Iosef Amasi have both come to the Cowboys this year, and we've got high hopes for both of those boys. They're displaying all the traits that we think can eventually become NRL players of the future, and they're learning the game this year. But athletically, they've been great. Like a lot of the Fijian blokes, they're very humble and hardworking, and really excited by what potential they have into the future.
And are they currently with the Blackhawks?
Yeah, well, they train every day with first grade, and then they play on the weekend for the Blackhawks.
Awesome. So Dane, I just want to talk about everything you've done with International Rugby League now. So going back to 2004, I think that's the year we first met, and you founded the West Indies Rugby League. Where did that idea come from? And it's Jamaica Rugby League has spawned from that. I actually still have my West Indies Rugby League jersey that I bought off you. But yeah, tell us about how that all came to fruition.
Yeah, I'd been involved, I guess, in International Rugby League prior to that time for a couple of years. It's probably, the 2000 World Cup really sparked my interest in international football. Seeing some of those minor nations playing the big boys was really enjoyable. I think at the time, to be honest, I think I went to Fiji on a family holiday of all things, and I remember walking down the street and just going, wow, these guys are just phenomenal athletes. So just big dudes, and then taking some interest in Fiji initially, and thinking how come at the time, we're going back to 2000, there wasn't a mass of Fijian players playing in the NRL, yet it's so close to Australia and they're such wonderful athletes, and that couldn't understand it. And from there spawned my, I guess, interest in rugby league internationally. And over the course of the next few years, we saw the evolution of a few things. Phil, you were involved with the Australian Fijian Rugby League, which was a wonderful setup, and fortunate enough to be sort of involved on the peripheral of that. And then I remember vividly, and this is getting back to the West Indies stuff, is going to a game in Sydney, and it was Greece playing Italy, I believe, at the time. And
Cogra, yeah.
Correct,
I was there that day.
Yeah, and it was amazing to think that here we are in Sydney with Italian and Greek heritage players playing, and the culture and the atmosphere that was generated at that point in time. And these were players of heritage that were representing their nations, and it sort of, I'd watched a bit of Super League, so I understood that there were some African and Caribbean based players over there of heritage, and just thought, well, if it can be done in Sydney, why can't it be done elsewhere in other countries? And in all fairness, started to look at Super League a fair bit in the game in England, and realised very quickly that there was a number of West Indian eligible players. And again, being a Queenslander, it was either footy in winter and cricket in summer, so I always grew up with cricket as a love, and the West Indies were obviously a really popular team. And again, looking at, I guess, areas in the world that hadn't had a rugby league presence but had some wonderful athletic talent, and Jamaica in particular stood out for that, and the West Indies as a global group. Jamaica probably wasn't the first thought in terms of just solely Jamaica, because of the nature of the Caribbean region. West Indies was formed because of, we were able to pick up some players from Trinidad, Barbados, Bahamas, through heritage, and so there the pool of player was greater, and we formed the West Indies Federation as a result of that, which was awesome.
I remember seeing, Dane, in the early days, you'd fund yourself to go over there and do the development, and I was just like in awe of the passion. And I remember there's a gentleman, Paul Morris, who was driving it in Jamaica. And so tell us about those early days. And I mean, obviously Romeo is doing such a great job,
doing incredible,
and his team, and Jamaica Rugby League's in schools now.
Yep.
Tell us about those early days, and how did a domestic comp get formed?
Yeah, I remember at the time the original one was Steve Price and also Dean Thomas over in England. They reached out once we sort of launched a bit of a campaign online for eligible players for the West Indies Rugby League based in England, and both of those guys had Jamaican heritage, and just it's amazing how the world works. And the internet wasn't as big a thing back then. It was around, but it wasn't as big a connecting tool.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason and however it happened, I received an email from Paul Morris, who was in Jamaica at the time. He was a Welshman by trade, and he'd gone to live in Jamaica, and he was involved with the rugby union and became a little bit disgruntled as to how the rugby union was progressing, and saw obviously what we were trying to achieve with the West Indies Rugby League Federation. He said, would you mind coming here to Jamaica and seeing what we're about and seeing whether there's any opportunity to form rugby league in Jamaica? And so I was due to go to England in 2004, and we were having our first West Indies test match against South Africa, and we played in London.
Yeah.
And just, I guess, through the way the world works and Paul reaching out, I changed my travel itinerary. Instead of going from Australia direct to England, did the long way around and went to Jamaica first and spent a week on the ground in Jamaica.
Yeah.
We picked up a player through some trials to join me on that trip, and he came across and played for the West Indies team. So by default, that guy became the first Jamaican, from the local competition to come across and be involved in rugby league on a more specific basis. And then through those talks with, at the time, Paul Morris and another couple of gentlemen at the time, we formed the idea of the Jamaican Rugby League, and I met two wonderful friends, I'll now call them, in Romeo Monteith and Roy Calvert, and that was 2004, and still to this very day, they're involved with the game of rugby league, and they've done a great job of not only continuing Paul's and his wife Sue Morris's wonderful starting of the Jamaican Rugby League Association, but making it flourish as to what it is today, which is in schools, it's in the intercollegiate level. They've got a wonderful club-based competition, and now they're doing some wonderful things in the parishes as well. So couldn't have been more blessed to have come across those guys at that point in my life too.
So it must have been a proud moment for you when Jamaica qualified for the 2021 Rugby League World Cup.
Yeah, it was incredible. I remember watching it online. Actually, it was live streamed, and sitting at my home and shedding a tear. I guess it was a bit emotional that to think, from small things, these seedlings grow, and here we are, 18 years later, and they're going to a World Cup, which is incredible to think, and I just can't wait to watch them play, and hopefully they do really well come October. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think they'll be the surprise packets of the World Cup. I think they'll do all right because they've got a lot of Super League talent. Dom Young, the Knights there. So, good luck to everyone involved with Jamaica Rugby League for the upcoming World Cup campaign. So, Dane, fast forward to 2011. So, not only have you played a big hand in the formation of the West Indies Rugby League, you helped set up the Vanuatu Rugby League. So tell us about how that all came about.
Yeah, I guess with Jamaica, I'd been over to Jamaica probably 3 times post 2004 and spent some time on the ground working with Romeo and Roy in particular, trying to develop young talent in Jamaica. And just by pure geography, it's a long trip from Brisbane all the way to Kingston. So I guess I was really keen to continue to work with International Rugby League, and probably knew that from a hands-on level point of view it'd be very costly and very timely exercise to obviously continue working hands-on all the time in Jamaica year on year. And at that point in time I was going through a transitional period in my life with having a family and trying to do some coaching as well, and thinking to myself it might be a bit more difficult to have that hands-on craving that I was looking for in Jamaica solely. So I started looking a little bit closer to home and realised that through my involvement with Fiji Rugby League in particular, that the Melanesian people are ideally suited to rugby league. There's obviously some wonderful athletic talent in amongst Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and then I realised that at the time Vanuatu didn't have a presence in rugby league. So it was not dissimilar to when we first started the idea of the Jamaican or West Indies Rugby League Federation, that we might have the opportunity to actually develop talent a little bit closer to home. And for myself, it's only a 2-hour journey from Brisbane to Vanuatu, and so reached out, just by again sheer luck really more than anything, happened to be 2 guys, one based in Brisbane, Eric Tasusu,
right,
and also Sandy Marango, who's based on the Sunshine Coast, that knee Vanuatu guys, and that when we reached out and put out an advertisement that we were looking to start this and call for players of heritage initially, that those guys reached out and really sort of drove the way for myself to sort of get on board. And I remember getting on a plane and going over to Vanuatu, and 2 hours sped by really quickly, and realised once I got there that there's some athletic talent here that we can try and mould and give an opportunity to, I guess, expose to our great game.
Excellent. So Dane, just on Vanuatu Rugby League, when we hit 1,000 subscribers to this YouTube channel, they were the first recipients of our 10 seedings, because we just saw what a great job that was happening on the ground there, development-wise, and we thought, 10 balls, it's not a lot in the scheme of things, but it can help, with club training and domestic competition activity, etc. So we're now in the 11th year.
2012 it sort of kicked off, like 2011 December we sort of went over for the first engagement, but 2012 is when things first really sort of started to get some impetus. So 10 years on.
So how's from then to now, how's rugby league in Vanuatu? Tell us about the state of the game there.
Yeah, they're self-sufficient now, which is awesome, and they've had some wonderful contributors over the last 10 years, but probably none more so than Ben Howard. He's been incredible, and he's maintained his commitment. He was working over there at the time, and he's heavily invested into International Rugby League, and he does a wonderful job. Sandy Marango's the same. He's been there since the start, and they've had some wonderful people now involved in the game, and to the point where they look after themselves. They're self-sufficient. They run a domestic competition. They're getting juniors involved.
Wow.
And COVID probably impacted them fairly significantly. It's obviously tourism's a big part of their driver economically, and taking that away obviously takes away money. It takes away people, potentially Australian people that were over there that could obviously influence the game. Brett Wright was a really good driver of the sport there locally, but I'm really excited by what they can potentially do now that the borders are sort of opened up again, and we can get a bit more traction back on the ground. For myself, I haven't probably had a hands-on role since sort of 2015-ish or thereabouts, but I think it's been really awesome to see, never far away from my mind, to see them guys continue to grow and develop. And I think in time that we'll see eventually, like we've seen with Fiji and Papua New Guinea and obviously the other islands, Tonga, Samoa, I think we'll see more development and we'll see more opportunity given to players once they get their infrastructure back up and running over the next few years.
Oh, fantastic. So Dane, 2021, a Pacific Tres comes to fruition, and you're a director with the Pacific Tres. So can you tell us about the concept and how it's all going? Yeah,
Pacific Tres was actually born about with the idea of, again, an international focus, trying to promote a nation in New Caledonia, which is a state or a territory, I should call it, of France and mainland France. And the idea being that to expose, I guess, another nation to the game, and in this particular case, French nationals based in New Caledonia, which would grow the talent pool for France in their national game. And France has obviously had a long tradition of being a successful rugby league nation. It's probably not had that same success in the past 20 years or so that we saw obviously in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the heyday of French rugby league. But in the notion that now we're seeing the rise of the Pacific nations, and obviously size and athleticism is a huge part of that. Yet understanding that there's some incredible athletic talent based in New Caledonia, Polynesian, Melanesian, European based. So to give those guys opportunity in New Caledonia, the chance to play rugby league first and foremost, but then to think where could they play, and I guess taking a very much a Papua New Guinea Hunters mandate is looking at the Queensland Rugby League as a potential opportunity for this Pacific Tres team to play. The beauty about a Pacific Tres team, just by pure geography, language, history, is that it would also tie into Vanuatu in particular, but possibly even into French Polynesia, being Tahiti, in time, which we're really excited about. And again, we launched just prior to COVID. COVID hit and sort of stopped a bit of momentum over the last few years, but we're really confident that the next few years we can expose people from New Caledonia in particular to the game, and whether that, in its current form, the ambition is to play in the Queensland Rugby League at some capacity.
Yep.
Again, whether that eventuates is going to come down to funding and competitive drive, etc. But I guess the flip side of that is if we expose some form of these players to the game, there's always the potential that they could go to mainland France and play, for whether it be Carcassonne, Albi, Toulouse, Catalan, obviously, in time. So we'll see.
Well, two players in the French National Rugby Union team are from New Caledonia, so it certainly shows there's plenty of talent there. Yeah,
year on year we see quite an exodus of young talent from New Caledonia going to Metropole or mainland France, and they get opportunities with rugby union-based clubs there, and there's no reason to think that those guys couldn't have the opportunity in rugby league also if we expose them to it.
No, definitely. So Dane, being a big supporter of International Rugby League, you must be excited with the upcoming Rugby League World Cup.
Yes.
Like we all are. So can you tell me, who do you think will turn a few heads at this World Cup?
I think Tonga obviously have shown in the last few years that they're going to be incredibly competitive. Really excited to see Fiji. I think that, again, we go back 20 years to the 2000 World Cup, 22 years is, there was a handful of Fijian-based talent, born, raised, developed, but now we're getting to a point where we're going to see a number of those guys born, raised, developed. Tui Kamikamica, Viliami Kikau, Mika Ravalawa, Semi Valame. I'm really excited to see how they'll go. I think they'll have a really good squad. They've got some good guys in key positions in Api Coruscant, obviously, and so I think Samoa obviously will be really, really competitive, but I probably, by default, mate, can't go past Jamaica, and just really keen to see how they handle this first occasion, and no doubt, I'm hopeful that they'll be everyone's second team, mate.
Yeah, no, very exciting to see how they go. So Dane, you've got extensive knowledge of footy. You've got a great footy brain. So I want to get your opinion here. So you're the NRL CEO, and it's up to you to appoint the 18th NRL franchise. Where do you put it?
I guess for me personally, internationally driven, but I just see New Zealand as being such a key area for rugby league. It's got incredible talent, and I think that in time, I know the Warriors over the last few years being based in Australia has been difficult for them in terms of retaining their junior talent, and I think that in time though we see year on year the mass exodus of young player from New Zealand coming to Australian based clubs, and I think realistically that from a timeline / geography point of view, that having two teams based in New Zealand where you could have live games into TV where they're playing at a reasonable time slot, but it's a live TV game on the eastern seaboard of Australia. I think that makes sense. In an ideal world, we'd have one in Perth too, but obviously if it's only one, I would suspect that New Zealand, potentially could be that place.
So Christchurch, Wellington.
Give or take. I don't want to get into a fight with our good neighbours, but I've been to both places. I think they've both got opportunity. Wellington might have a little bit more rugby league infrastructure, but at the end of the day, I think somewhere in New Zealand probably makes a bit of sense. Yeah, no, definitely. I'd back that idea. 2019, I was in Christchurch for the Fiji PNG game, which was a curtain raiser for the Great Britain-New Zealand game, and Christchurch, fantastic city, great infrastructure there, so they could definitely host an NRL team, as can Wellington. So interesting decision, and we'll see what unfolds. Absolutely. But Dane, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and up the Cowboys. Yeah, thanks, Phil. Cheers, mate. Good on you. Cheers.